So with Thanksgiving tomorrow, what I wanted to do today is look into, it comes up around Halloween and Valentine's Day in my household. Certainly, I don't celebrate Halloween or Valentine's Day as a rule in my home. So because for religious reasons, those are religious holidays. That's not part of my religion. I did not grow up trick-or-treating, as hard as that might be to believe for some of you, because as I like to say, Judaism doesn't glory in death.
Do you celebrate Tu B'Av?
We always celebrate Tu B'Av very religiously.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And so I lost my train of thought there for a second. But so what I wanted to do is look, but Thanksgiving is very much a part of my childhood, very much a part of the Jewish experience here. But there is this interesting fine line, which is where is the line between our participation in the rituals of the cultures around us versus where are our Jewish lines. And so I have this text here, is Thanksgiving Kosher? This is by Rabbi Michael J. Brody. Okay, so who is Rabbi Michael J. Brody? Rabbi Brody is, one second here. Rabbi Brody is a professor of law. He's young, an academic director of the Law and Religion program at Emory University. He's the Center of Study of Law and Religion at Emory University, including a focus on Jewish law and Jewish ethics. Okay, so he has a JD from NYU. He is a law professor, and he was a member of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the Orthodox Union of Rabbis. And he asks this question, is Thanksgiving kosher? So before we're going to have a little discussion on that. But before we do that, the reason I brought up Valentine's Day and Halloween is because this holiday was different. This was something the family always got together for. We went to my mother's brother who lived in Philadelphia. We would drive down at 5:30 in the morning because my father always wanted to beat the traffic. We would see the Thanksgiving Day parade, which would go down whatever that famous street is, Market Street or Franklin Street or whatever street that was in Philadelphia. And it was a real large gathering. And so I'm curious for those of you, if you could just share where you grew up. You don't, just a couple or just people could share a little bit about where they grew up and their associations with Thanksgiving, I think would be a good way to start. Does anyone want to go first?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Please, Sandra. I can hear you great. Can I see you too?
I don't know how that works, but I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, and we always celebrated Thanksgiving on Friday night. We called it Shabbat Thanksgiving. My mother would always make a big dinner for Friday night. So the family would assemble, and my brother would come with his family. They'd go to the Macy's parade on Thursday. And on Friday night, we'd have our lovely Shabbat Thanksgiving. And my husband and I carry that custom with us because we have, when my daughter married, her in-laws lived in the Bay Area, and they wanted Thanksgiving with them. So it worked out perfectly. They would have Thanksgiving with the in-laws on Thursday and Shabbat Thanksgiving with us.
That's lovely. So that's a great example of a way to really Judaicize Thanksgiving. What about you, Dale? Dale, can you hear me?
Dale's muted.
Mute.
There you go. Oh, hold on.
Unmute. Okay. Unmute. Okay. We would go to my great grandmother's house in San Francisco, and it was an extended family Thanksgiving that included, my great grandmother's brothers and sisters and some parts of their family. And it was wonderful because it was the only time I got to see all these cousins that I never saw during the rest of the year. Yeah. So I loved it. And, Yeah, so I loved it. When my great grandmother died, they collapsed it a bit, and they only did it with the family line from my great grandmother's descendants, not from her brothers and sisters. And I was sorry about that, but we still would get about 70 people sometimes.
70 people.
And then, you know, they had it in hotels for a while because her home was torn down because it wasn't up to code or whatever, I don't know. And then when my grandmother and her two sisters died, my parents kept it up by renting a place in a country club. And then when my parents died, some people of my generation tried to keep it alive for a while, but there were only two people that had homes big enough to host the whole family by that time. And then one of them moved out of the area and the other one got divorced. So there's no place to have them anymore. And people just sort of lost interest with the generations that didn't remember my great grandmother's home. And that was a family tradition that went on for more than a century.
Wow.
We don't do it anymore, unfortunately. And I'm very sorry. A lot of people have moved out of the Bay Area, you know, so.
Yeah, it's like the story of a lot of the Jewish rituals. It's a story that, you know, my grandmother and mother used to tell me about the big family Passover Seders that eventually, you know, they had to rent out the hotel rooms and eventually, you know, that dwindled out throughout the generations. Thank you, Dale. Other people want to share their Thanksgiving experiences growing up. What was Thanksgiving like? Yeah, Susan.
So I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I grew up in a Catholic family. I converted later. But it was a huge extended family. My mother had 8 siblings. My father had just one sister, but everyone was invited, and there was the children's table and the grown-ups table, and they were all over the place. And
did you do the this is what we're grateful for around the table?
Yes, we did. But the thing about my mother, she was just such a giving person. She actually grew up in an orphanage, and her mother died at a very young age. And so she just, you know, learned from young age, and just going through the depression and just not having anything, that, you know, to take care of everyone. And, you know, she used to go to this place in Denver called Opportunity School. It was run by the Denver Public Schools, and they had free classes. And this was when she had retired, but she would bring home people that had nowhere to go. And we had one year we had this wonderful African-American elderly lady at our table, and, you know, always inviting everyone. It was fantastic, really.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Susan. What's interesting to me is how religious some of these families are about doing the ritual of the Thanksgiving, whether it's religious with regard to the cranberry sauce or with who cuts the turkey. There's a famous scene in the movie Avalon. If anybody ever seen the Barry Levinson movie Avalon, you cut the turkey. If anyone has ever seen that movie, it's just interesting how ritualized this became for a lot of Jewish, for a lot of families and a lot of American families. Yeah,
the one that would cut the turkey was my father. He grew up and his father ran a country in a farming area, the grocery store, and also a very giving person, would take care of all of the immigrant farmers.
Wow.
And but he was also the butcher. He was also the postal service. But my dad, because he did the butcher work, he was the only one that cut the turkey.
The only one allowed to cut the turkey. Exactly. What about you, Sandy?
Well, I've been doing Thanksgiving up until this year, every year in my parents' house, which my sister then moved into. So it's always been the same. This year, unfortunately, we're just doing a Zoom call. Was
it a big holiday? I mean, so you're a longtime San Francisco family here. Was it a big holiday for your family? Part of me thinks it was sort of the reason that it took off in your father's generation or his parents' is because it was a real American, a desire to fit in, to be American.
But it was like Pesach. We convened all together, but we had the turkey and the stuffing, and we had two stuffings. One that my mother always made, the traditional bread stuffing, and then I came along about 25, 30 years ago with wild rice, shiitake mushroom, and corn stuffing, which
That was a big hit.
That was a big hit.
If there's leftover, I'm around on Friday.
Yeah, they had two, so we had two stuffings, and the trimmings and Brussels sprouts. And actually, my nephew just sent this article on how in the last 20 years people have grown to enjoy Brussels sprouts, but actually, forever. My parents loved Brussels sprouts. So
Thank you.
it was, yeah. So there were fun things like that. And
I just want to add something.
Sure.
Well, you say that not only is it a way of fitting in to American custom, but it was the time we had off. Like even if when we went to college, we had those few days off so we could come home for those 4 days. And my brother lived in Massachusetts. He would come to visit at that time. So it was convenient for families to get together at that time.
But your family wasn't machmir on keeping stringent, religiously, halachically stringent on doing it at the right time. So like, what are you doing? What did your family do at 4:00? Were you watching football on a Thursday, or were you just?
No, we were not a television or athletic football kind of person. I guess I don't know. I guess we played. Maybe we had dinner, but it wasn't like the big dinner for the next night. Yeah, we probably did family type things. The children.
I found that it really connected me to America. I mean, it was one of the holidays where you could watch TV. You could partake in the parades. It wasn't Yontif. And it was, we'll talk about this in a second. We'll talk about the origin story which I learned from my daughter is a little different from what I was taught when I was a kid. So she got a lesson at Brandeis, which was a little different from the story that I got. So I love the story. I love the mythology of it. I'm very, you guys have already criticized me for my love of American mythology. It is what it is. And so that part of it really resonated. And I think that's why it was such a Jewish holiday. Marcia.
The origin story, though, is
terrible. Well, I got it. I have it with me.
Okay. I think the thing that this is not sort of as I grew up, I have all kinds of stories I could tell. The thing that seems to me the most kind of telling the American thing is Stan and I were in Holland around Thanksgiving one year when we were kind of newlyweds, and we stayed with some colleagues of Stan's in Utrecht. And it turns out that they were going to be traveling in the United States in San Francisco around Thanksgiving, and we arranged for them to stay with my parents. So they came to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. This is the American holiday. And I think that it's really kind of funny because they probably went back to Holland and they told them that they had a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, which was what my mother always made for any kind of holiday. So they had tomato soup, they had chopped liver. My father ate chopped liver while they were watching the football game before the Thanksgiving dinner.
Of course. What else is chopped liver for?
And turkey, and it was very, they did not have what is this string bean with mushroom soup kind of
the sweet potatoes with the I've never seen sweet potatoes with marshmallows anywhere near a Jewish household, so I don't know.
No sweet potatoes with marshmallows. Some of these things that my friend who grew up in the Dakotas, thought of as typical Thanksgiving fare. We don't have that kind of stuff at my house, but I think the thing that's kind of interesting is how different people make Thanksgiving their own. And there was a show or something on KQED one year looking at different cultures and what the Mexican family had for Thanksgiving and what the Chinese family had for Thanksgiving. And they were all imbued with certain kind of traditional cultural foods with the turkey. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Totally. Yeah,
how you make it-
latkes and a turkey. Exactly. Yeah,
So-
my aunt, was married into my family. They came over on the Mayflower, and her family's like founding members of the shul in Philly, which is like one of the oldest Road of Sholom, which is one of the oldest shuls in the country. And she would always that was her holiday. And it was the only time I ever ate deviled eggs. I never saw a deviled egg except at a Thanksgiving meal. No, we had kishka instead. So let me open up the text here, and let's take a little look. Yes, go right ahead, Ellen.
My experience will shock all of you. My family came to the United States from Germany in the 1830s, and they helped found the Reformed Synagogue in New Orleans. And we had a very typical Reformed Jewish New Orleans Thanksgiving, complete with oyster stuffing. We did have all the sweet potato and marshmallow and the green beans.
Ellen, I officiated at a wedding once in New Orleans. It was actually a couple months before Katrina, and the rehearsal dinner was a crawfish bake or boil. I don't know which word they used. Yeah,
Boil.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Reformed Jews in New Orleans, I had to check with all my cousins. We never had a Seder. And I thought that was true of all my cousins, but I just wanted to make sure, oh yeah, that was the same for them. And it just was so integrated into the Christian community, unreal.
So that's a nice segue into the issue with Thanksgiving, because and does anybody want to guess where the issues are? So he's going to cover in this text three prominent thinkers. He's going to cover three prominent Orthodox American thinkers. So let me just open up so you can get a sense of who the three that he's going to cover and their take on Thanksgiving. As we mentioned, he's going to cover Rabbi Yitzhak Hutner, who was in Brooklyn, an Orthodox Rosh Yeshiva, originally from Warsaw. He's going to cover Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he is going to cover Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was the Orthodox posek of the 20th century. And so what's the issue? Gary Sokol, what's the issue with Thanksgiving being kosher? What do you imagine this whole dispute is about? I'm choosing you, Gary, because I know you like interesting disputes.
It's also interesting because one of the reasons those there wrote those responses was because the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York has had a formal Thanksgiving ritual since the 18th century. They said, it's the ultimate American thing, and they do Hallel, and they have a whole special service. And the rabbi there is now Soloveitchik's grandson, I believe. So
Mayor, that's right. Yeah, Mayor. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the rabbi there. So that was part of the reason why Feinstein was forced to issue his opinions on this, because there was a big balagan there. Well,
what do you imagine the halachic issue is?
Well, it starts out with is Turkey kosher, and still many people and many rabbis debate that because it's not a biblical animal. So you can start from there. It starts out, I guess it would be idolatry. I mean, you know, because what are we worshiping? Who are we giving thanks to? I mean,
Turkey, good, beautiful. Turkey is an issue. That's a disputed fowl. I don't think we're going to get into that here, but that is something that I was wondering myself. Idolatry, who are we giving thanks to? What a great question. Thanksgiving, towards whom? I love it. What else? Anything else? What about behaving like an American? What about copying the ways of the non-Jews? So that is going to be one of the issues that comes up. In fact, here it is. Just
I should say it was interesting. Last year created new issues because, or maybe a few years ago, Hanukkah and Thanksgiving fell in the same time. Yeah. So we were supposed to do Hallel on Thanksgiving, and that
Thanksgiving
that created a real broigus for the Orthodox because they didn't want people to be thinking that we were saying Hallel for Thanksgiving and not for Hanukkah.
So here you go, Leviticus 18. I think you can all see this here. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. So there is this prohibition not to follow the ways of the non-Jews. And Rabbi Brody will use the term Gentiles, not to follow the ways of the Gentiles. Okay, so here, introduction, let's just go into it. Now we've got about half our time here, so we'll be able to get through this, hopefully. Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday, all of the things that we've already covered. Now here is a little bit of the history of the American Thanksgiving. I know there's a little dispute between myself and my daughter over the nature of Thanksgiving, but let's just discuss it a little bit here so we have this story. So the first Thanksgiving Day celebration was held in response to the survival of the Pilgrims of the particularly harsh winter of 1622-23. Not only did the colonists themselves celebrate, but food was sufficiently plenty that even the Native Americans with whom the colonists were at peace were invited. This celebration took place on July 30, 1623, in the middle of the summer. Such celebrations occurred throughout New England area in the 1600s. However, they were only local celebrations and only to mark the end of a particularly difficult winter until 1789. In 1789, Congressman Elias Boudinot of New Jersey proposed to President Washington to recommend the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, towards whom to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors the Almighty God, especially by affording them the opportunity to establish a constitution of government for their safety and happiness. After a quick debate, President Washington issued the first National Thanksgiving Proclamation, setting November 26, 1789 as Thanksgiving and a national holiday. Alana, this is different from what Autumn came home with yesterday. I just want to point that out. Washington stated in his proclamation, I do assign the Thursday, the 26th of November next, to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being, that's pretty religious, who is the beneficent author of all the good that was or that will be. All right. But notwithstanding Washington words, Thanksgiving did not become a national holiday. This is where Autumn was correct. From 1790 to 1863, there were no national celebrations of Thanksgiving. And then in 1846, when the unity of the country was again in controversy because of the Missouri Compromise, Thanksgiving came into vogue again. And then finally, this culminated with President Lincoln's Thanksgiving Proclamation of 1863, which was the first such proclamation of a national Thanksgiving holiday since Washington's. So since 1863, Thanksgiving has been celebrated as a national holiday. All right, so that's a little bit of the backstory. What I think is interesting about that, and I think it's relevant in 2020, is that the story, the myth, the narrative is really powerful in times of great civil unrest, in times when we've felt split as a nation. The story of Thanksgiving has been something that we revert back to. Okay, so one might ask whether Jewish law should simply defer to the American law determination here that Thanksgiving is a secular and not a religious holiday. Once this conclusion is reached, the claim is made, little controversy remains. The simple answer is that American law adopts a definition of secular that is clearly religious in the eyes of the law. I think I skipped something here. I guess the question is, it's described as a secular law, but it doesn't seem as Jews to actually be a secular law. And so, for example, in the case Kamek versus Wahi, a court determined that the holiday called Good Friday was a secular holiday. So too, the Supreme Court has both ruled that Christmas and Hanukkah are secular holidays. So that American definition of what qualifies as secular versus religious is, I guess, different, certainly different from what would qualify as, it would say, binding on the adherence of halacha.
But my understanding was it was out of respect for Washington, and that the early Spanish and Portuguese synagogue were respect for his his famous speech to bigotry, no sanction, to persecution, no assistance.
Amen.
And he upheld secularism in America. So if he was willing to declare a holiday, then they were willing to respect that because he showed respect to them in that case and stood up for them.
Amen. That seems like that. I mean, I'm with that community. That's the community I'm with. But Hutner, we're going to see. So let's see how these Orthodox poskim handled it in the 20th century. So having reviewed the history of Thanksgiving, it's now necessary to turn to the questions involved in its quote unquote celebration. The things that we've discussed here, Sandra's Shabbat giving or Thanksgiving Shabbat, I forget how she called it. The first and most significant issue is whether it is permissible to eat a Thanksgiving meal with the classic foods that American tradition indicates one should eat this meal: turkey and cranberry sauce. So this is really like the halacha of Thanksgiving. Among the authorities of the previous generations, 3 positions have been taken on this topic, and these 3 positions have each been accepted by various authorities. However, before we're going to get into those positions, a certain background is needed on the nature of the prohibition to imitate Gentile customs. All right. So we have this text from Leviticus 18:3 that we just said, that said it's prohibited to imitate Gentile customs. The Tosfot says that there are 2 distinct different types of customs reading that verse. 2 different types of customs we have to avoid. First are idolatrous customs, and the second are foolish customs found in the Jewish community, even if their origins are not idolatrous. Rabbeinu Nissim and the Maharik, those are medieval Spanish and Italian thinkers, disagree and rule that only the customs that have a basis in idolatrous practice are prohibited. So there's this dispute, as Gary pointed out. Is it idolatry to participate in this practice? If it is, then it's going to be problematic. But if it's not, no big deal. So, but it seems to me that there is this addition from the Tosafot with regard to a foolish custom. But through the line, the discussion was apparently foolish, but secular customs are permissible so long as they have a reasonable explanation. Here's the Ramah. Those practices done as a Gentile custom or law with no reason one suspects that it is an idolatrous practice, or that there is a taint of idolatrous origins. Anybody do that? Anybody knock on wood? Anybody ever knock on wood? Right? That's one of these practices. Where does that come from? Well, that's just a practice that people do. In America, they knock on wood, right? So we might just pick up that practice. Would we think that it has an idolatrous origin? Let me ask you here who don't know where that comes from. Would you imagine that going like this has an idolatrous origin? Well, Sandra knows. Of course it does. Of course it does. It's because Jesus was crucified on wood. So if you're going to knock on wood for good luck, it's as if you're knocking on the cross, right? That could that qualify as an idolatrous origin for reasons for someone to knock on wood? Yeah, probably.
I think it's interesting that this goes right to the Ramah for its response, because, you know, many of the Orthodox poskim rejected the Shulchan Aruch because it was Sephardic practice, and Ramah wrote the set table in response,
that's right,
or the tablecloth in response to it. So they're trying to articulate an Ashkenazi response to the Sephardic practice almost.
Well, I mean, it's like you were talking about with the Spanish and Portuguese perspective. I mean, I think
That's what I mean. That's the Sephardic
right.
practice, and these rabbis are responding to that. That's why they go right to the Ramah to respond to that.
So here's the Ramah. Those practices done as the Gentile custom or law with no reason, we suspect it has an idolatrous origin. However, those customs which are practiced for a reason, such as a physician who wears a mask to identify him as a mask, that can be done. All right. As will be seen later, there are authorities who favor being strict on the opinion of the Gra, who rules that the only time secular customs are permissible is when they have a Jewish origin. So the Gra is pretty stringent about that. Of course, does Thanksgiving have a Jewish origin? That perhaps is a question in and of itself. All right. So according to this approach, secular customs created by Gentiles are prohibited even when their origins are not religious. Additionally, and independent of the halachic obligation, Jewish law forbids a Jew from actually celebrating idolatrous religious events himself. Thus, a Jew may not attend an idolatrous Indian office party or directly facilitate its observance. So too, a Jew may not attend a birthday party for an idol worshiper if the birthday party includes worship of idols. Yeah, that's pretty hard, right? That's pretty intense. Howard.
This is well, first of all, I did a look up on Wikipedia, and the turkey is a North and South America creature, actually, which is why we never, probably why we assume Wikipedia is accurate. But I've been thinking during this class today about the question you first raised, and I don't have a memory of Thanksgiving growing up. My parents were born in the early part of the 20th century. They grew up during the Depression and then World War II. So when I grew up in the 50s, things were different. We had Rosh Hashanah dinner every year, extended family. We had Passover, extended family, but not until I became an adult did I look at Thanksgiving.
That's fascinating.
I don't know how unusual that is, but I'm not saying maybe I blocked out the Thanksgiving dates, but I didn't block out Rosh Hashanah and Passover.
Marcia, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, what this sort of strikes me, this one thing about attending a birthday party. Well, not so much a birthday party where they're having a religious service, but attending an Indian party with some Indian rituals. This one of the things that I used to tell my kids, and certainly my grandkids too, is that, you know, we can pretend, and this is a real American, maybe not just American, but a problem is this whole issue of, I don't celebrate Christmas. It is not my holiday in my house, but I can go to your house and join you in your celebration. Just like I go to your birthday party, even though it's not my birthday. And the way this discussion is being presented precludes that kind of participating or observe, you know, even if you're on the sidelines observing other cultures, the rituals of other cultures, or the celebrations of people of cultures outside of your own.
Yeah, so I guess the Orthodox opinion with regard to the fences around fences that one would need to keep in order to avoid the perception of being in the realm of idolatry are a little bit too high for you. And I think they're probably too high for a bunch of us. Bert, I can't hear you. Kind of unmute, Bert.
There, now I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Just to touch briefly on what you said about you never saw the sweet potatoes with marshmallows. My mother was Orthodox in her own way, but she was raised in Iowa. Well, she's born in Russia, but basically we always had that. I mean, we were as much Midwestern. I think it's more, as Ellen said, Southern or Midwestern versus New
100%.
York. Very different way of being. And I'm, as far as a lot of these, the last stuff we're talking about, I mean, of course we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. I mean, my late wife, who was very unsympathetic to Orthodoxy, would have said, this is all a bunch of hooey. I mean, this nitpicking, you know, we live in America. We speak English. We go to jobs. It's one of the glories of living in America. Again, maybe more West Coast than East Coast or Midwestern. We associate with Gentiles. Christmas is a very different issue. I mean, we never had a problem celebrating Thanksgiving.
But what Marcia brings up, so I think poignantly, did I freeze here? Can people still hear me? Did I freeze? What Marcia brings up so poignantly, sorry for the frozen. What Marcia brings up so poignantly is that this is, it's the office internet, it's not mine. This is the real question that comes up with me as a rabbi all the time amongst interfaith couples who grew up in different religious backgrounds, and either one converted or one didn't convert, but they're raising a Jewish family. The question is, can they then go to the parents' house? Can they go to the grandparents' house who have a tree? And can the parents tell that child, look, we're a Jewish household. We don't have a tree. We don't celebrate Christmas, but this is Grammy and Grandpa's holiday, and we want to honor and respect them by going and getting gifts and eating lots of goodies there. So the question, I get asked that question all the time, is that permissible? And if you were to take this Orthodox approach, it would not be. Stuart Bledger. Wait, Stuart, you got to unmute. Okay, I think I lost everybody. Am I still here?
Yes.
Yeah, you're fine. Stuart has muted.
Stuart, you have to unmute. We can't hear you there.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, yeah, Bert's view about Thanksgiving being, just ingrained in our culture as Americans as a joyous occasion is something that was certainly noted in the previous edition of our prayer book, Sholom, and I'll read directly from it.
Thank you. Great.
Specifically, when you talk about Tachanin is omitted on times of community celebration or community periods of sadness. And here's what it says in Sholom. It says, it is also deleted on special festive days in the general calendar, such as Thanksgiving. So it specifically mentions Thanksgiving. And I'm struck at the fact that this language about Tachanin is not contained in the current edition of our prayer book. So I guess this discussion that you've initiated, Rabbi, is something that other rabbis of your generation, have opened up, and like you, they, want to analyze the appropriateness of celebrating certain secular holidays.
I think that's exactly.
For me, I'm of Bert's generation, and I wouldn't give it a second thought about celebrating Thanksgiving as a community-wide joyous occasion, or Halloween, or Valentine's Day.
I love it, and I see a lot of hands, so I'm going to get to all the hands in a second. So let's go to Betsy XT.
Where's Betsy?
Hi, everybody. So, Adam, can you see?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah.
You can see your eyeglasses.
Visible?
Yeah, we can see your head. We can see your eyes. Go. There you go.
Okay, so I grew up from early childhood. My father's best friend was another Hungarian physician who had immigrated, and they were both denied positions in the Jewish hospitals in Chicago, which did not welcome people in the late 30s and the 40s. They seemed to be very threatened by European immigrants, and they both found positions in Catholic hospitals. And they were best friends till this man, who I called Uncle Alex, died. He was married to a Spanish Catholic woman, and our family's custom was to be at their house every Christmas Eve. for a really warm, beautiful environment, and sharing clearly not his custom, but the family's custom. And they were nice and they had a present for me, but it was like never anything like I felt was mine or cared about. And then later, two sets of my cousins, their parents for a while became Unitarian and weren't really raising them, weren't ever denying their Judaism, but weren't really doing much about their Judaism. So they had trees in both of those houses, and 4 families were together all the time, eating some very treif food, by the way. And we would go out Christmas caroling and stuff like that. And that to me, again, it just meant more presence. They were with us on Hanukkah. My father was the patriarch of the Jewish stuff. They were with us for Seder, but in their house, they kept Christmas. So why not? It was fun, but it was never like, oh, I want to do this, or, oh, I want this to be my base. This is not mine. I don't own it. And at a later point in my life, when the Black Power movement was building and Chicano movement was building, and I wasn't yet in any way identified or affiliated Jewishly, and I was in my probably early to mid 20s, I thought that I could become a Mexicana, except at some point I realized that if you're not Catholic, I think, or some, an indigenous faith, but if you're not pretty absorbed in the way that Catholicism has been blended into Mexican culture, that wasn't going to fly. And that was the point at which I started looking for Jewish stuff. And that was my way home, which was great. But, I'm comfortable being in a lot of places. And, but I understand, it's like once the door is open to sharing things with other people that aren't just about sharing the ritual, but are about food, and then you don't want to insult your host and all that thing. That's where it was really hard in the earlier generations, and it is really hard for white Orthodoxy. Usually keeps itself separate. It's like, if you're really religious, it's hard
separate
to be
dishes. If you've got,
it's
really hard to mingle. It's very hard to mingle when you've got separate dishes. Makes life very challenging. Judah, you had your hand raised. Did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Anyway, to me,
Sorry, Betsy. Yeah, keep going, Betsy. I'll come to you, Judah, when she's done.
I was just going to say, to me, Thanksgiving, I don't remember when it started being a regular. We always did it. I think we always did it, but I'm not sure about that. But now it's a big deal, and my whole family regroups in Chicago, and one part of the family it's more ritual for because she is not Jewish and was raised a really big Thanksgiving feast. But to me, it's like an extension of Sukkot. It's just like, I don't know if it has religious roots. I just think of it as, all the wrong things about what happened with the Native Americans, so the right things, at least some gratitude for survival, so.
Yeah,
I think it as sort of Sukkot step 2.
Thank you, Betsy. Judah.
Yeah,
and you don't have to sit outside and be cold, although this year you
do.
Now?
Yeah, you got it.
So I just want to share this anecdote when, we were talking about idols, and I went to this meditation retreat at the Land of Medicine Buddha in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the last day we were in this hall where there were 100 statues of Buddha. And I came back and I talked to Rabbi Lou about it because, it made me so comfortable. And Rabbi Lou actually used to lead Makor Or once a year to Tassajara for a few-day retreat. And Rabbi Lou said to me, and he said, there's a big statue of Buddha there. And he said to me, and I see that statue of Buddha, and that's my sin for the day. That's my sin for the day. So we're conservative. We're not Orthodox, we're conservative. And I just love that. So, what can I do? There's the Buddha. All right.
Wow, thank you. That's because I've been wondering about Rabbi Lou as just below the surface here in this conversation. I really appreciate that story. I have more hands. Gary Sokol.
I have a whole panoply of things that could fit in with all these comments. I find it a little inconsistent in the Orthodox, has stated here. I understand Orthodox cannot go into a church. That's policy, but they do allow you to go into a mosque. A mosque is fine. And I've never quite understood that distinction, why one is and one isn't.
A voda zara. It's about a voda zara. There are
And
no
mosques?
images. There are no images in a mosque.
Is it just simply the images?
I think, I mean, that's how I've understood it, but it's a good question.
Well, the mosque is one God, whereas in Christianity, there's the Trinity. So that's
Well, the
not-
Muslims, that's right, Dale. The Muslims take a very stringent approach when it comes to idolatry. So maybe that's the rationale for the leniency.
Okay.
But your larger question, is that what it's all about, is a good one.
And I will gotta say that, I do not partake of any Christmas things. I'm inundated by that whole period, and I just basically check out all of the Christmas period. And I will say this, and I will say
You've never seen, wait, you've never been to Rockefeller Center? You've never been to Rockefeller Center to see the
I've walked past. I haven't made a special trip there for it, but I'm in New York. I would walk past. I mean, I don't go to, when people invite me to, when they decorate their Christmas tree, I turn them down. I have no interest in going. And, I will say at our house, Paul is very adamant. He doesn't want to invite non-Jews for Passover just so they could watch us, like we're putting on a show for them. He has no desire for that. I mean, ours is a Seder, and it is part of our practice, and he has no interest in having, he gets really mad when I say asked about my people like that. But when it comes to Thanksgiving, though, and it's a little interesting because, I mean, Dina de Machuta Dina is the law of the land, and we are a secular country titularly, and it is officially a secular holiday. So we can celebrate that with our own rituals that, and we, of course, you won't as a Jew have the marshmallows. And I will think
unless you're from the South.
You can
Or the Midwest.
Marshmallows aren't usually kosher, so that's why I bet you won't have them. But
Fish gelatin.
But one of the things that was interesting, that some of you, I think, have heard the story from last year at our house. We invited these friends for Thanksgiving, and we said, okay, you can bring a cake, but there can't be any lard, and it can't be dairy, and it must be parve and everything. So they went to Oakland Kosher, and they said, I need a cake. Can't have lard, they can't have dairy. Which, that was a spectacular cake. Oakland Kosher looked at them like they were nuts, but they brought this cake. It was truly a terrific cake.
Alana, you haven't heard from you yet.
Hi. It's interesting. I'm thinking about just in relation to our kids who are 6 and 9, just kind of what they will be drawn to, or as either like rebellion or just or not, and kind of how this comes into play with these holidays. I mean, I went to a Waldorf school for high school where we celebrated Advent. I mean, I like kept my mouth shut when it was, saying anything that wasn't, or that was of another faith, but I feel like it made me most likely to marry a rabbi. That was the path it took me on, but you never know kind of how it will play out, those exposures or situations. So for me, it made me more interested in my own faith, and but you don't know. And it was funny, our little one on the way to kindergarten yesterday, on the drive to Brandeis, he asked me, he said, Mom, do you think I will stay Jewish when I'm a grown-up or become Christian? And I was like, stay Jewish. I mean, obviously. But
well, we should have sent him to a Christian school instead of Brandeis. That's the takeaway.
Dan says he's trolling us. He is. He's very smart, and he's trolling us with these questions. But it's fascinating to me. I didn't grow up with a lot of fences around the fences. So, but now I feel much more kind of, my fences are a little higher now.
What was your Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was a holiday that we were allowed to skip. It wasn't like Passover or Rosh Hashanah. I mean, we usually had it together, but there were a number of years where we had it in California, actually. My parents had friends in LA, and my brother was in college there. And we used to go have Thanksgiving in California, not with the whole family, because that was one holiday that was permissible not to all be together on. Because
you didn't tell me that when we got married. You didn't tell me it was permissible to skip when we got married. You know that, right? Other thoughts. Sandy Edwards.
Well, I just wanted to make two comments. One is, isn't it in the Talmud that you follow the laws of the country you live in?
Yeah, Dina, that's what Gary just cited, that Dina de Malchut Dina, but I guess the question, the law of the land is the law, and you have to follow that. But if the law of the land tells you to worship Jesus, you're not going to follow the law of the land, because it's just going to be.
This law says.
Well, no, that's the dispute that the rabbi, we're clearly not going to get into it, but that's the and by the way, I put the text in there, and by the way, we totally fine that we didn't get into it. I enjoyed this conversation more, but the text, if you're interested in what those three rabbis have to say, I put it in the chat. What do you think about the Christmas example, Sandy?
I always went over to Jewish friends who had a Christmas tree and was happy with the presents and things. I mean, the other thing about Thanksgiving always was, it was so wonderful because there was no religion. It was just about eating a meal together and being thankful for what we had, and I don't see that as something.
Were your parents more religious about the Thanksgiving rituals, or about like going? I'm interested in the fact that families who never say the motzi or the birkat are very stringent about going around and doing the gratefulness and the thank yous. That to me is fascinating. You never did that.
We never did an organized thank you.
Gotcha.
Thankfulness.
Gotcha.
It was just a dinner. And that, it didn't have all that stuff, presents and religion, and,
Gotcha.
There was nothing that didn't work for us.
Thank you. Susan.
So we were talking about children, and what's interesting is, I mentioned that I was raised Catholic, but I never really felt like I was. And I had a best friend, growing up, and she was Jewish, and I used to, be over at her house for many of the holidays, and, it really resonated with me. And, I guess my point is, when you're a child, I really think that there can be that knowing of what you truly believe. It happened to me. I mean, I never understood the Holy Trinity, and you would try to question it, and you weren't really allowed to. I think the thing that I love about Judaism is the ability to question, the ability to.
And I thank you for sharing that. Amen. And I hear that from people all the time, Susan, that they just knew, that they knew at a young age. Yeah.
I did know. And then the other thing is, I did have to raise children Jewish, but then, we had my family in Colorado that we would go visit, and we did visit maybe one Christmas, I think. We usually didn't go back at that time. But, they understood. I think that they understood that was their holiday and this was ours. And,
Yeah, but as Alana said, there is an appeal to the other. Yeah. What do you have there?
Find out. This was from the Reform, the New Union Home Prayer Book. It does have a prayer for.
Oh, I'm well. That's of course. That I wouldn't have. Of course, that's true. Howard Aberman.
This is may not be relevant, but when I must have been in elementary school, and they had, when we started, we were sitting at our desks and in the morning, and we had, among other things, we recited we did a Pledge of Allegiance and that kind of thing, but we recited what they called the Lord's Prayer. And Our Father kind of thing. And I felt very uncomfortable with it. And after discussing it at home, I was told I could just keep my mouth shut and keep my head down and everything would be okay. I don't know. I assume at one point have changed the rules. But I mean, I grew up in a relatively Jewish neighborhood. You know, I went to Philip Roth's high school.
Yeah, I mean, we also had that. We had Christmas carols, as Alana, you know, that were just a part of the way that the school was educated. Marcia.
Well, you know, we were talking about having your foot basically in two worlds is what we're talking about.
Yep.
You know, I have my Jewish home here, and then I go out into the bigger Christian world, which is now getting more diverse. You know, Hindus and Muslims and all kinds now. It's more diverse. But I remember as a kid, and I'm hearing this from other people as well, I had the lead role in the elementary school Christmas play, which was not religious. Particularly, it was sort of how each class was a different country and how they celebrated Christmas in different countries. And I remember the principal saying, I said, you know, what should I wear for the play? And she said, where would you wear to church? And I said, oh, I don't go to church. And she just looked totally appalled. And then she finally just said, well, wear party clothes. But what always got me, and I had no problem being in this play, but I had a lot of problem singing Christmas carols. There's Jingle Bells, but the other ones, when I listened to the words, I thought, I don't like these. And I remember going to California Girls State in high school, and they did recite the Lord's Prayer, which for a San Francisco girl, we didn't recite the Lord's Prayer in school. Of course not. And I thought, I want to recite this prayer. And they had some kind of ecumenical thing where a rabbi's wife or cantor's wife came and spoke. And I went up to her and I said, what do I do with this Lord's Prayer thing? And she was from LA. And she said, well, you just stand there and don't say it. You don't have to say it. But I've heard other people also say this thing where, you know, there's certain things that I can observe, but I can't participate in. And in a sense, that kind of strengthened my Judaism. So,
Yeah,
Betsy,
I mean, you sound a little like Rabbi Feinstein, which is great, Marcia. Like there is something about these distinctions, right? That are, you know, here he says Feinstein, by the way, he had 4 published opinions on this topic, which gives you a sense of how often it came up on the question of celebrating any event on a holiday of the Gentiles if the holiday is based on religious beliefs. Such are prohibited if deliberately scheduled on that day, the first day of the year of Thanksgiving. It is not prohibited according to law, but pious people should be strict. And then he says here in 1980 on the issue of joining with those who think that Thanksgiving is like a holiday to eat a meal. That's sort of what Sandy Edwards said. Mm-hmm. Since it is clear that according to their religious law books, this day is not mentioned as a religious holiday and that one is not obligated to eat a meal. And since this is a day of remembrance of the citizens of the country, nevertheless, it is prohibited to establish this as an obligation. So he just wants you to know you're welcome to do it. You just can't do it religiously. I think, Marcia, what you're pointing out, it may be the orthodoxy is taking it a little too, I know the fences among the fences are bothersome to all of us, most of us, if not all of us. But what these poskim are pointing at is this discomfort that we feel in certain settings in which we have to stand but not say anything, and not wanting to place ourselves in those compromised positions to protect, protect us. So Bert, what do you say? You got to unmute yourself again.
Since we've been touching on Christmas, this sort of a tale of generations. When I was a kid at Winfield Scott, we had to sing Christmas carols. I mean, it was just the class. And my closest friend, who unfortunately died young, and there's one Christmas carol, I think it's the First Noel, where there's a line, "Born is the King of Israel." And we would scream Israel. And that was our little rebellion. And the teacher was, now, Bertie, now, Sasha, you can't. Okay, now, flash ahead 30, 40 years. My daughter, who's now 50, when she was at Lowell, she was in the choir. And the choir director had them sing Christmas carols. And she and the other Jewish kids, mainly Jewish girls, went and they protested, and he included Hanukkah songs. So I don't know if that's progress or not, but Yeah, and then the other thing, this is a pet theory of mine, that Jewish merchants, probably partly for monetary reasons, but they, what I would say, defamed Christmas. So again, when Stuart was referring to of our generation, Christmas was more of Santa Claus and presents and reindeer. The Christian element was taken out. And one of
Yes.
the first people to protest,
Consumerism replaced it. That's right.
well, consumerism, but also defanging the Christianity part of it. But one of the first people to make a major objection was Stan Freberg, another Jew who had this song about green Christmas. So it just shows how ubiquitous Jews are, and we take all sides of every issue.
Did Jews write any Christian Christmas music? Did we write?
Yeah,
any
Irving
Christmas?
Berlin wrote White Christmas.
All of them, pretty much. Alana, well, it's interesting because our daughter was in public school last year. Our daughter was in public school last year, and
She's
she
in the room now, Dan, with me. Just FYI, so I don't know.
Do you want to tell us, Autumn? Do you want to tell us about the choir? What was the hotel? What was the hotel? Just tell me the name of the hotel, please.
The Fairmont.
The Fairmont. So she was in the 3rd grade Alamo choir, and they went down to the Fairmont, and they gave the kids an option. They could either wear a Santa hat, or there was an alternative. What was the alternative she wore? It was an alternative.
It was a reindeer or a Santa?
It's a reindeer. That's right. You could either wear a Santa hat or a reindeer. And Alana went to the Fairmont and took pictures of our daughter sort of singing these Christmas carols. And the two of us are just like felling. Look at how American she is. I swear that's what my response was.
And 12 months later, she is in Jewish school. So there you go.
So what I thought was interesting, we didn't really get a chance to pick up on it, was maybe our relationship to America is changing. And I think that that's definitely the case into this next generation. And, while Stuart was saying he would never not celebrate Thanksgiving, I mean, I guess growing up, I would never not celebrate Columbus Day, for example. But our relationship to the country and to America and to our Americans' history, as the narrative, as has been told, is changing and is evolving. And as a result, I do think it's helpful to have a Jewish home to fall back on. It's even more important now. Betsy, you froze. Betsy, unfreeze yourself. All right, I'm going to stop recording now, and I will wait for Betsy. But thank you all for joining us. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
Had a really different Jewish upbringing